When you become difficult to manipulate, something in the social atmosphere changes so quickly it almost feels supernatural. You do not even need to announce your transformation. You do not need to condemn anyone. You do not need to expose secrets. You only need to stop being movable. And then the temperature drops. Faces that once smiled begin to stiffen. Voices that once sounded warm begin to turn metallic. Invitations that once arrived easily begin to disappear. And you may wonder, in the lonely confusion of your own mind, what exactly you did wrong. You might even begin to question your morality. You might whisper inwardly, "Have I become cold?" But the truth is far more disturbing. It is not you who became cold. It is the world around you that is losing its grip. And grip, for many human beings, is the only form of love they know. You see, much of what people call affection is not affection at all. It is proximity used as leverage. It is intimacy used as an entrance point. It is kindness used as a corridor into your psyche. And if you have lived as an empathic person, especially one shaped by a family wound, if you have learned to read micro-expressions like survival language, if you have learned to anticipate moods before they erupt, if you have learned that peace in the room depends on your emotional labor, then you have also unknowingly trained yourself to be manipulable. Not because you are weak, but because your nervous system equates harmony with safety. You were not taught to say no. You were taught to keep the air calm. You were not taught to hold boundaries. You were taught to hold people together. And in such a system, the empath becomes a psychic tool, a tuning fork for everyone's unspoken needs, a shock absorber for everyone's shame, a silent translator of moods. The family does not see you as a person. They see you as regulation. Now, what happens when regulation stops? What happens when the tuning fork breaks? What happens when the empath's nervous system no longer volunteers itself as the emotional caretaker of the room? The system panics, but it does not panic loudly. It panics psychologically. It panics in symbolism. It panics in coldness. Because coldness is one of the oldest forms of punishment in the human world. Coldness says, "You are no longer included." Coldness says, "You have made me uncomfortable. Therefore I will withdraw warmth until you return to obedience." Coldness says, "I will deprive you of emotional contact until you remember your role." It is primitive. It is tribal. It is not even personal. Yet, when it is directed at you, it feels like a death sentence, because the psyche of an empath has been trained to interpret withdrawal as danger. Many people do not understand this. They think coldness is simply distance. But for an empath, coldness is an alarm bell in the bones. It awakens the old childhood memory. Love was conditional. Love could vanish. Love could freeze. And therefore, your psyche may rush toward repair. Apology, explanation, self-blame, anything to restore warmth, because warmth is the drug you were conditioned to chase. But I want you to see very clearly what is actually happening beneath the surface. When you become hard to manipulate, you are not merely changing a behavior, you are changing an archetypal position inside the collective unconscious of your relationships. You are moving from the archetype of the useful one into the archetype of the sovereign one. And sovereignty is terrifying to those who have built their psychological comfort on your flexibility. The manipulable person is not simply someone who says yes The manipulable person is someone whose inner authority is outsourced, their sense of reality is porous, their self-image depends upon others' emotional response, their sense of identity can be reshaped through guilt, through praise, through disappointment, through fear of abandonment. In other words, the manipulable person is someone whose ego has not fully separated from the surrounding field. Their ego is still interwoven with the emotional needs of others. They are still living in what I would call a participation mystique, a mystical participation with others' psyche, where the boundaries between self and other remain blurred, as if you are still inside the same psychic womb. Participation mystique is a fascinating phenomenon. It is ancient. In primitive societies it is normal. The individual is not separate. The tribe thinks, feels, fears, desires together. But in modern psychological development, we must individuate. We must become a self. And individuation is not becoming selfish. It is becoming psychologically distinct. It is the birth of inner authority. It is the slow creation of an ego that can say, I can hear you, and still not obey you. I can care about you, and still not abandon myself. I can witness your emotion, and still not absorb it as my responsibility. When you begin to individuate, you become hard to manipulate. But here is the shadow truth. Many relationships do not survive individuation, because those relationships were never built on love. They were built on fusion. They were built on control. They were built on your unconscious agreement to remain small, to remain pliable, to remain emotionally accessible in the specific way the other person needed. And when you withdraw that supply, they turn cold. Coldness is not always hatred. Often it is exposure. It is the exposure of the other person's inability to relate to a whole human being. If someone only knows how to bond through control, then the moment control fails, the bond collapses, not because you became unlovable, but because their method of love was manipulation. Your new firmness reveals their poverty, and this is why it hurts, because you are not only losing warmth, you are losing an illusion. Most empaths do not realize that a portion of what they call connection was actually the other person's addiction to access. Access to your time, access to your attention, access to your emotional labor, access to your guilt, access to your fear of disappointing them, access to your empathy. And once you become less available to be used, they begin to experience you as a threat, not because you attacked them, but because you disrupted their inner economy. Let us speak about the unconscious economy. Every relationship has an energetic contract. Often it is never spoken, it is never signed, but it is felt. In many families, the contract is this: you will be the good child, the healer, the peacekeeper, and in exchange you will receive belonging. You will not disturb the emotional hierarchy. You will not call out the hidden sickness. You will not shine too brightly. You will not step out of the assigned role. If you do, your payment will be isolation, coldness, gossip, the subtle punishment of being emotionally exiled. Do you see the brutality of this contract? And because your childhood psyche needed belonging more than truth, you signed it. You signed it with your body. You signed it with your silence. You signed it with your nervous system. You learn to become agreeable even when you were dying inside. You learn to become understanding even when you were being harmed. You learn to become spiritual and forgiving even when your soul was begging for protection. And because you were empathetic, because you could feel the pain behind people's cruelty, you made excuses for their shadow. You translated their dysfunction into "they're wounded." You translated their manipulation into "they're scared." You translated their coldness into "they're stressed." And you forgot the most important translation of all: they are using you. Now, the moment you stop translating their behavior into compassion and start translating it into truth, you become unmanipulable. And the collective shadow responds, I want you to understand something that may disturb you, but will free you. Manipulation is not only a tactic of narcissists, manipulation is a universal impulse of the unconscious. The unconscious wants predictability. The unconscious wants control. The unconscious fears uncertainty. And when someone cannot regulate themselves, they will regulate you. When someone cannot contain their anxiety, they will contain you. When someone cannot face their own inner chaos, they will recruit you into managing it. Therefore, when you withdraw, they feel abandoned, not because you abandoned them, but because you stop being their nervous system. This is why they turn cold. Coldness is their protest against your individuation. But within that coldness is also something else: envy. It is not discussed enough how often coldness is envy, disguised as morality. When you become harder to manipulate, you gain something that others may secretly resent: inner freedom. And inner freedom is the rarest form of power. The manipulative person who relies on controlling others cannot understand inner freedom. They cannot create it. They can only steal it. They can only dim it in others so they do not have to face their own slavery. So when you become firm, when you stop reacting, when you stop begging for warmth, you confront them with their lack, and rather than face that lack, the shadow reacts with contempt. The ego says, I'm disappointed in you, Flast, but the unconscious says, how dare you be free when I am not? Ren. This is why the coldness often comes with moral judgment. Suddenly you are selfish. Suddenly you are changed. Suddenly you are cold. Suddenly you are difficult. Suddenly you are ungrateful. These words are not accurate descriptions. They are spells. They are designed to shrink you back into the familiar role. The manipulator does not say, I miss controlling you. They say, you're becoming someone I don't recognize. And because the empath fears abandonment, the spell works unless you have awakened. Now we must speak of the most painful part, why you still care. Because if you were simply rational, you would observe their coldness and walk away. But you cannot. The empath does not just observe. The empath feels. The empath psyche is a field, and when someone turns cold, your body reacts as if the sun disappeared. You become alert. You begin scanning. You begin analyzing. You begin thinking of explanations. You begin recalling every detail. You begin wondering what you did. You begin rehearsing messages. You begin fantasizing about restoring warmth. You begin bargaining with your dignity. This is not weakness. This is conditioning. Coldness triggers the child archetype inside you. For many empaths, the most profound trauma was not overt abuse, It was emotional withdrawal. The parent who became silent, the parent who punished with distance, the parent who withheld affection until you performed correctly. This is why, as an adult, you may find yourself magnetized toward cold people, not because you enjoy suffering, but because your psyche is unconsciously trying to solve the original wound. It is trying to win warmth from coldness. It is trying to create love where love was absent. It is trying to finally succeed at the impossible task to melt the frozen parent. And the tragic part is that you will repeat this pattern until the unconscious becomes conscious, until you can see, I am not attracted to them. I am reenacting my childhood. So when someone turns cold because you became hard to manipulate, it is not merely a present event. It reactivates the entire archetypal memory of conditional love. Your nervous system collapses into old time. You become 7 years old again, trying to figure out what you did wrong, so the parent will look at you again. But here is the psychological truth. You did nothing wrong. You did something right. You disrupted an unconscious contract that was built to keep you usable. This is why the coldness feels so violent, because it is not an argument. It is not a disagreement. It is exile, and exile is the oldest terror in the human psyche. To be exiled from the tribe once meant death. Therefore, your body reacts to coldness as if it is life-threatening. You may feel tightness in the chest, nausea, insomnia, obsessive thinking, sudden fatigue. You may feel a strange emptiness, as if a cord has been cut. And indeed, a cord has been cut, the cord of participation mystique. You are separating from psychic fusion. This process can feel like grief, because you are not only grieving the person, you are grieving the version of yourself who used to survive by being soft enough to be used. You are also grieving the fantasy that if you were kind enough, patient enough, understanding enough, then love would finally become safe. But love was never the problem. The problem was the unconscious arrangement. Let me bring a dream into this, because dreams reveal what the ego refuses to see. A person once came to me, an empathic woman, gentle, luminous in her sensitivity, but chronically exhausted. She had built a life around meeting the emotional needs of others. She said she felt invisible. She said people loved her, yet she felt drained. Then she had a dream. In the dream, she was standing in a beautiful house, full of guests. Everyone was smiling at her. Everyone was praising her. And then she noticed something behind the walls. There were pipes, and from those pipes, her blood was flowing into the house. The house was literally powered by her blood. She began to panic and tried to stop it, but the guests turned their faces away. They became cold. They said, "Don't be dramatic. The house needs this." And in the dream, she realized they were not guests. They were parasites wearing human faces. Now, do not take this too literally. The dream is symbolic. It does not mean everyone around you is evil, but it reveals a psychological reality. When your empathy becomes the fuel, people will call it love until you stop fueling them. Then they turn cold. This is the danger of being hard to manipulate. You will see who was only there for access. And this revelation is both liberation and heartbreak, because your own shadow will rise at this moment. Your shadow is the part of you that has been denied, the part that has been too polite to say, "I am angry, I am tired, I am done. The part that has been too good to admit I have been used, the part that has been too spiritual to admit I resent what I have tolerated. When you become unmanipulable, the shadow returns. And this is why some people fear your transformation. They sense the shadow. They sense that you are no longer as controllable. They sense that you might finally speak truth. They sense that you might finally stop being the nice one. And because they have benefited from your niceness, they experience your wholeness as danger. But I must warn you, do not confuse wholeness with cruelty. The shadow is not meant to destroy your compassion. It is meant to protect it. Compassion without shadow becomes submission. Love without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. Kindness without truth becomes a mask. The shadow, when integrated, becomes discernment. It becomes the ability to say no without guilt. It becomes the ability to withdraw without explanation. It becomes the ability to remain warm inside while refusing to be consumed. This is the alchemy, to remain human without being manipulable. Most people cannot tolerate this in you, because most people are not in relationship with your soul. They are in relationship with your role. So they turn cold when you stop performing. This is also why you may notice something strange. The more calm you become, the more disturbed they become. The more silent you become, the more aggressive they become. The more neutral you become, the more dramatic they become, because your old reaction was their reassurance. Your old guilt was their power. Your old neediness was their control. When you withdraw reaction, you remove the mirror they used to see themselves as superior. And then a very ancient archetype emerges, the dethroned king. The manipulative person often carries an inner kingship fantasy. I am the center. Others orbit me. They may not say it. They may even appear humble, but unconsciously they feel entitled to influence, entitled to obedience, entitled to emotional service. And when you stop orbiting, you dethrone them not outwardly, but inwardly. And the dethroned king becomes cold. He cannot scream like a child because he must preserve the image of power. So instead, he freezes you out. He withdraws recognition. He withholds warmth. He punishes you with indifference. But indifference is not strength. It is a tantrum in a suit. If you can see this, you will stop taking it personally. The coldness is not a verdict on your worth. It is a symptom of their lost control. But still, you must face the second danger, loneliness. When you are hard to manipulate, you may find yourself standing alone at first. The crowd thins, the old friends become strangers, the family becomes quiet, the lovers become distant, not because you became unlovable, but because you stopped being convenient. This is when many empaths relapse. They return to people pleasing, they return to explaining, they return to overgiving, they return to the old self-betrayal, because loneliness is terrifying, and the psyche is tempted to trade dignity for warmth. But this is the threshold of individuation. The psyche is asking you a sacred question. Will you betray yourself to belong, or will you belong to yourself first? This is not a moral question. It is a psychological one, because until you can belong to yourself, you will always seek belonging through manipulation. You will always be vulnerable to coldness. You will always be controlled by withdrawal, so the danger is not their coldness. The danger is your addiction to warmth. Yes, I will say it plainly. You may be addicted to warmth, not healthy warmth, but conditional warmth, the warmth that comes when you obey, the warmth that comes when you shrink, the warmth that comes when you abandon your truth. That warmth is not love, it is reinforcement. It is the reward given to a trained psyche. And when you stop responding to it, you begin to detox. Detox feels like emptiness. It feels like doubt. It feels like nausea in the soul. It feels like maybe I am wrong. It feels like maybe I should just apologize. It feels like maybe I am too sensitive. It feels like maybe I should be the bigger person. These thoughts are not wisdom. They are withdrawal symptoms. You are withdrawing from the addiction of being needed, because being needed gave you identity. Many empaths have no identity beyond usefulness. They are the helper, the listener, the healer, the peacemaker, and when they stop that role, they face a terrifying void. Who am I if no one needs me? Who am I if I am not saving anyone? Who am I if I am not absorbing everyone's emotions? This void is sacred. This void is the womb of the self, and this is why the coldness must happen. Because it forces you to detach from external validation. It forces you to stop chasing. It forces you to stop begging. It forces you to become your own warmth. When you can become your own warmth, the coldness loses its power, and that is the true shift. To be hard to manipulate is not to be hard-hearted. It is to be internally anchored. It is to have a core that does not bend with every emotional weather change. It is to have a relationship with your own inner authority, such that even if the outer world freezes, you do not collapse inwardly. Now listen carefully. The psyche will test you. The moment you stop being manipulable, you will be tested through guilt, through silence, through passive aggression, through sudden affection, through I miss you, through you've changed, through moral accusations, through coldness, then warmth, then coldness again. This oscillation is not random, it is conditioning, like a gambler at a slot machine. Your psyche becomes addicted to unpredictable rewards. This is why toxic relationships are so addictive. The warmth is intermittent, and intermittent reinforcement is the strongest form of behavioral control. So when people turn cold, then suddenly warm again, your nervous system gets hooked. But if you can hold steady through the cold phase, something astonishing happens. They either adjust or they disappear. If they are capable of love, they adjust. They learn to meet you as an equal, not a resource. They learn to respect boundaries. They learn to relate without leverage. If they are not capable of love, they disappear. They seek another source. And this is the brutal clarity of becoming unmanipulable. You lose what was never real, but you gain yourself. And I tell you, the self is worth more than 1,000 conditional relationships. Because the self is the only relationship that does not abandon you when you become whole. And in the end, you must understand, people turn cold because your light stops serving their shadow. You have become a mirror they cannot control. You have become a boundary they cannot cross. You have become a soul that no longer negotiates with fear. This is frightening to the collective because the collective lives on unconscious agreement. You are breaking the agreement, and every time you break it, you are not only freeing yourself, you are confronting the world with a rare archetype, the individuated human being. Not the saint, not the victim, not the healer who bleeds, but the whole one. And wholeness has a strange effect. It exposes the frozen hearts around you so they turn cold, not because you became dangerous, but because you stopped being easy, and that, for many, is the greatest threat of all.